18th session of the G20, and the G20 comprises 20 of the biggest economies around the world, really constituting about 80% of global trade. And in that session, they admitted the African Union as a whole to be technically the 21st member within the G20 summit. How important is it as a move for the whole African continent, and what does it add to the African continent, the AU, and to the G20?
Well, it's a recognition of the importance of Africa now. We have seen lately what took place in Niger and all these countries, and we have discovered the riches they have. So, of course, how come these countries are not within the G20? Because they have the uranium, they have the gold, they have the oil, they have the gas. If there is industrial countries, these elements they use for the industry, it comes from Africa. So now I think that the G20 is getting back to the source of its wealth, the source of its riches. And it's a way to tell Africa that, or it's Africa rather, it's telling the world, we're here. No one could forget our role in new economic development, and we have to have a word in what you're doing. And I think this is what the African Union now is achieving. It will have a word, it has a permanent presence. I don't want to rush and say it's a shift of powers now between, as even Biden said, the southern hemisphere, that the countries from the south and also from the east are now gaining momentum, gaining this power of saying, we are the rich countries. Rich countries are not only the Western bloc, the Western hemisphere. It's also Africa who has the sources, and the East, like Russia, like India and China.
Yes. Well, before we start delving into the specificities and the specifics of the African Union joining the G20, the Indian Prime Minister has invited President Sisi to attend the summit, and he gave a speech there, and it was actually the President's third time after China in 2016 and Japan in 2019. Now, how important is it that the Indian Prime Minister acknowledges President Sisi and acknowledges the economic weight of Egypt to invite him to the G20 summit and giving him the chance to give a speech there?
Well, it's obvious that President Sisi has this personal contact with Prime Minister Modi of India. And I think that the fact that he is invited again in the G20, Egypt is now the hub of these commercial connections that, that the East want to establish with Africa. To go through Africa, India and China have to go through Egypt as the gate, and the secure gate, because Libya it's not that secure, Algeria is far, same with Tunisia. Egypt has the Suez Canal. We have all the potential, the diplomatic potential. We're the Arab world, the heart of the Arab world. We're the heart of the Middle East. We have also long tradition of trade and commercial relations with India, with Russia, with China. So there is this closeness between us. And the second element also is that President Sisi is the first president from decades who didn't polarize his politics. We're not pro-West or pro-East. We are pro our interest and the stability. That's what we are doing. So they feel safe and secure in dealing with us. And we don't blackmail any countries with the cards of the refugees or the terrorism. We're doing our duty to protect the region. So that's why they know that this leader is someone they could trust, someone they could work with, someone with whom they could initiate a new era. This new era needs leaders, needs charisma, needs people who can take initiatives. And let's not forget also that Egypt now is a member of the BRICS. So his presence is also very important as the presence of the president of South Africa, which is in Africa.
Yes.
So our presence is an economic weight and a diplomatic weight, and also in the person of the president is a charismatic presence.
Yes. Dr. Amir, now you've mentioned that Egypt is not a polarized sort of country in terms of following its economic interests. However, during his speech, President Sisi mentioned the importance of synchronizing and formulating all the sort of economic agreements among different financial institutions, different economic assemblies. Do you feel that there are different, wouldn't say agendas, but different paths or different attitudes by different institutions and by different economic entities worldwide now that also we are involved, we are members as well in BRICS and heading NEPAD. So do you feel that there are different sort of directions that could be conflicting or maybe not working towards the same path, economic path?
It's obvious that, let's be frank and clear, what we are heading to, and they are saying it loud and clear, towards the dollarization. That the dollar won't be the superpower in the currencies now, or the trade currency. And answering your question, of course, the Americans won't let it go like that. President Biden, when he was there, he witnessed by himself the weakness of the U.S. policy in his era. They wanted, for example, to condemn Russia and talk about the Ukraine problem. Everyone declined. No one supported that. It's the first time that happens for the Americans, that they cannot implement, they cannot tell those who are assisting, we will say so you'll do it. They failed to do it. And they all said, we are here for economy. We are here for development. We are not here to talk about wars and condemnation. And Russia is a part of us. And this is a great victory also for Russia, because President Vladimir Putin wasn't present by himself. And he was just sitting in the Kremlin, and he won the game. So President Biden is facing, or the Americans, two conflicting situations. They want to diplomatically and militarily weaken Russia inside an economic forum. It's an economic forum, after all. And at the same time, they cannot believe that these countries, these leaders sitting beside him, Prime Minister Modi, and also the representative of China, because Chairman Xi Jinping didn't go by himself. They are all working, in Egypt also, all the leaders working to dollarize, to stop this power of the dollar, which was something never the Americans thought that it will happen one day. And the European partners, answering also your question, of course they know that their currency, they have to protect it, but at the same time they know that these Southern Hemisphere countries and these Eastern countries are the source of their wealth. And they have noticed that in Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali and Gabon, when they saw that we're losing the oil, the uranium, and everything. So I think the Europeans are more realistic than the Americans in this situation. So of course there will be conflicting ways. There will be some ways to handle and stop this process. But I think that the majority of these countries, which is the East and Africa, they're all working together now for a new era.
Well, the American, I mean, I know it's a bit far-fetched, but the American elections are taking place in almost a year. Do you think that the US administration, I mean, the biggest economic power in the world, do you think that they would have enough time to retaliate with certain measures regarding the softer political tone regarding the Russia-Ukraine crisis that took place in the G20 summit?
The Americans don't need to plan to retaliate. They always retaliate. It's through sanctions, through boycotting countries, sanctions. Before it was military action. Now they're not doing it really. So I think that the U.S. policy it's about that, especially the Democrats. So the Democrats now want to show the Americans that the tax money payers, the money was spent for Ukraine and spent it elsewhere. It's not gone like that. It has a purpose. And what's amazing is that even inside the Republicans, some are voicing the same rhetoric of the Democrats, like Mitt Romney, for example. And they're saying, well, we're doing the greatest, they call it investment, that we are killing Russians and letting the Ukrainians go on with the war, with this failed counterattack. And the problem is that, as one of the experts, previous military experts in the Pentagon, Colin Douglas McGregor, said the U.S. is losing a lot, or he said we are winning many enemies now across the globe. And he said when Saudi Arabia and the Emirates joined BRICS, that's a very heavy blow to the dollar. And the Americans should know that this will impact our economy sooner or later, and the Biden administration is not telling us that. So he said what the Biden administration is doing from here till the elections, he said escalation. And they hope that many countries will go in these escalations. Well, I think that the Europeans went very far, and I think now that they are willing to slow down the confrontation, because a confrontation with Russia. Look, for instance, speaking about economy, the military industry is a huge part of the Western economy. Look what happened for example, the tanks, the German tanks, the Leopards. They were destroyed on the battlefield very easily. We saw it on all the videos by small drones. And this destroyed the reputation of the German military industry. Now the factories now are not selling as they sold before. Yes. Because we have tested the weapons, it didn't work. Same for the Challenger, it was blown up. Same for the Javelin, it didn't work. So the Europeans are paying a very heavy price. So the Americans, their way of working now is inside, so the indictment of Donald Trump, and outside is conflicts. So many countries will be in this situation and cannot get out of it.
Yes. Sir, now, talking about the African Union being now part of the G20, technically G21. So the African Union effectively has 55 countries. South Africa is already a member of the G20 before the admission of the African Union. Now, how effective can the African Union or individual African countries make deals with the rest of the G20? Is it easier to be an independent country part of the G20, or as a part of a collective within the African Union? Is it easier to make deals with other members of the G20? I mean, does the G20, do they have to go through different channels through the African Union to make a deal with Egypt, or make a deal with Ethiopia, or make a deal with Chad, for instance, or whatever? So does it make us more powerful being present within the G20 through the African Union, or would it have been better to be independently there?
No, it's of course independently. We have the African Union cover, which is good. It means that you're a geopolitical force, you're a continental force, but in the same time you will deal by your own. And especially that Africa is not like the EU, have one policy, one word. Look what took place in Niger, and they didn't get, they don't have a real decision about the country, what to do about it. Look about the Renaissance Dam, they didn't solve it for us. So the African Union is a good cover. It's a show that you belong to a continental force, but in the same time, of course, every country will deal separately. But there is a very interesting point about the action of these African countries who used to be followers of the neocolonialism, as they say, of France, of Britain, and especially France. I think it's obvious that in the coming months, maybe weeks, we will witness a new whole Africa that we never saw before, under the auspice of China and Russia. A country like Niger, who has the uranium, look how they increased the prices of uranium in 1 week. It never happened in its whole history. It will cost France a lot. It's not the Niger who did it, of course. It's the powers behind Niger. But this is the difference. You will have entities inside Africa. They will be strong. They will act as the Gulf states, increase the prices of gas. Maybe they will create like the OPEC, something, they will join OPEC. Gabon, the same thing. They will be very independent in their decisions, but still there will be a force protecting them from the outside. It would not be like before that they have the authority of Paris and they are following what they get from Paris as orders. So you will find new entities inside this continent, energy hubs. Look at Captain Traoré, Ibrahima Traoré of Burkina Faso. When he met in the African-Russian summit in St. Petersburg with President Vladimir Putin. He said, we have the energy, we need you to make the reactors for us, to work with the oil plants, to work inside because we have the energy. And President Putin said, of course we will do it, we won't be late for you. And they started working now. So this country, sooner or later, would be a rich country like the oil states like Qatar. Let's not forget that history repeats in itself. Before the 1970s, we didn't see the Gulf as it is now. And now also, we will see a new Gulf, if we call it like that, inside Africa.
But at the same time, there are reports, for instance, that France is actually deploying different troops around Niger, and also, on the other hand, there's Nigeria that is supporting the French involvement within Niger. So will these forces cancel each other out because they won't get out without a fight?
If they want to get a war of attrition with Wagner, for example, why not? Look, there's lots of secrets behind what's going on, behind the scenes. As you said, Nigeria. Well, the president of Nigeria said, I support the action. And then when he went to gather his generals and mass the troops, he got intelligent reports that he could be like Mohamed Bazoum, the president of Niger. He could have the same fate, or like Ali Bongo of Gabon. So he said, wait, I don't want him to go into that again. And they said it's very, very fragile inside the military. So he said, let's go to diplomacy. So he's not well prepared for war. The French, they know they're in a war of attrition. And they know the Russians knew how to get rid of them in Mali and in Burkina Faso and Central Africa. And now they are encircled in Niger with their military base. The French ambassador now is not diplomatic, has no diplomatic status. He and his family, he's surrounded. So of course, President Macron is in a severe situation now. He has to protect France's image, but in the same time, he knows it won't be easy. It won't be easy at all to fight back in Niger. already he lost all the surroundings. And the Russians are playing a very smart game. For example, look what we heard about Wagner's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin. He was in Africa, and the next day they show us the plane falling from the sky. The third day, it's Gabon has the coup d'etat. What's going on? Where is the guy?
Well, do you think that all these different developments and turbulences taking place in Africa, will it hinder any sort of cooperation with the G20, or does business and businessmen, I mean, do they always find a way around all the chaos, around all the turbulences?
Well, let's say that the Chinese and the Russians now understood that how the economic and military Western civilization was made from. It was made from conquering other countries, getting their riches, use it in their own land, and then spread it to the world. They want to do the same thing, but they do not want to make it in a way copying the same prototype. No, they want to show the peoples there inside Africa, we are your friends, we will come and invest inside your countries. The first thing, you will join big institutions, BRICS, G20. We will invite you in several conferences. Just let us in, we will help you, and you will have a new era. That's why the people were so happy. They were having the pictures of Vladimir Putin in Gabon, in Niger, and the Russian flags. They're happy to host the Chinese because they got what they didn't have before, the status. So the Chinese and the Russians are not making the same mistake the West made, which they never gave a status for the Africans. They're giving them the real status. They're making them feel they're at their home, they're rich, they have a bright future, and stay at your place. We don't need your immigration. Stay. We will come at your place. We will do the job for you. Exactly as what happened in the Gulf.
Dr. Amir, now it seems that, I mean, the G20 is probably the latest in a series of worldwide and international community recognition of Africa's economic power or Africa's economic potential. Over the past 10 years, we've seen Japan-Africa summits, China-Africa summits, Russia-Africa, Germany-Africa, the G7, the European Council, and now the G20. We've seen BRICS, including countries such as Egypt and Ethiopia from the African continent. Now, how do we make sure that within all of these assemblies, economic assemblies and institutions, that we are getting a good end, I'm not going to say even a better end of the deal, but instead of all these economic entities and countries and economic powers, they're getting more of the upper hand in natural resources, in economic potential, all of these things, and maybe just giving the rest of the African countries a small end of, or a small piece of the economic cake?
No, it's different now because Europe especially suffered from the migration. So they understood what President Sisi used to say: work in your own countries. He used to tell the African youth that work in your own countries, don't leave. So I think that the Europeans understood lately that African immigration was not that helpful. They have now the Syrians also, and they have Iraqis and other countries, they say, invading their borders. And Italy and France are blaming each other, and then the UK said, well, we're out of this game and we'll close everything, no borders, and they closed Calais, and you know what took place on all this story. So I think that the Europeans trying to recalculate again and tell the Africans, well, why not stay at your place? Why not stay in Africa? But they still have the mentality, as you said, to give them some pieces. Because inside these Western capitals, there are decision makers who come from also old-fashioned institutions of thinking. Like, for example, the Russians are always our enemies. I have a friend who was a senior officer in the intelligence in France. He's now making analysis in the French media. And he said, when we worked with our allies, the Americans, against the Soviets, it was the Soviets. And then he said, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and this is the main point, when I came back and worked with the security apparatus, they didn't change their mind. They said, there is no Russia, it's always the Soviets. So they always do the same thing with Africa. These countries are not willing to be developed countries. No way, no way. They should have some pieces. So the problem inside the mentality, the ideology inside these Western capitals are the same. The Russians are Soviets. The Africans are not people worthy to have their independence. This would take time and experience, as they have seen now in their colonies.
I mean, if it takes such a long time to change the mentality at the highest level, what about citizens who are still, they wouldn't wait for the results of their countries joining different economic institutions. They need to feel a difference right there and then. So they would still immigrate illegally. They would still have the same sort of mentality. I mean, if the highest level still has that mentality, what about the normal, ordinary citizen?
Well, as the French call it now, we're living in the African Spring, like the Arab Spring. So in these couple of months, I think that even the African population are living in a dream, that they're gaining independence, that they could stand in face of the French and tell them get out, and they will get out. Mali did it. Burkina Faso did it. They kicked out the French. Mali said that the French language won't be anymore the official language. It's very hard for the French to accept that. So they are living in an era, they are saying to these world, as we lived in this era during the Nasser time, when we said, well, we will stand against the British Empire. Who are the Brits? They're nothing. So they are living now the same era. So that's why this dream, it's the game that we are witnessing now. The Russians want to give them this dream to make it become real. And the French want to tell them it will turn into nightmare. So in the middle is the population, as you said, and I think in the middle they know that we were treated as second-grade citizens in the European countries, even when we immigrate. Now we are the leaders in our countries, and it depends on the investment, and depends how these military institutions who took power in Gabon and Mali and Niger and all these rich power countries, how they will manage the resources. Is the population going to have modernity, going to have security, health care, everything exactly as the Gulf? I repeat it again, exactly as the Gulf. Are they going to invest really this dream to make it a reality? Then I will tell you, yes, it will be the collapse of the European monarchy power.
Well, it is definitely a great achievement that the African Union joined the G20. As you've mentioned now, it's a one voice, one unit, one continental presence within this table. But what about within the African Union itself? Are all the African countries talking, speaking in the same language, having the same sort of objective, no conflicts, no division amongst themselves? So when they're actually sitting at the G20 table, they are a power to be reckoned with.
Well, I'll ask you a question. Do you think the EU, they are in unity? They have several divisions inside themselves. What just helped is that they have an elite governing in Paris, London, Brussels, Madrid, Rome. It's like that. But inside, look, now. Viktor Orban of Hungary is different. Scholz is different than Macron. They have different positions. Of course, the British are in their own island, so it's different. But no, that doesn't exist in on this planet. Look, inside the BRICS, you have countries like China and India, and both of them, sometimes they have border clashes. They could kill themselves, each other at any time.
Yes.
We are Egypt and Ethiopia in the same BRICS, and we have these differences.
Yes.
Morocco and Algeria wanted to join, and both of them, they are in very hostile, they don't have the diplomatic relations. So I think, no, the Africans don't have this fact, because we don't share the same language, we don't share the same religion. In each country there is ethnic, tribal factions, like in South Sudan itself. So I think that, no, they won't have one voice. But I think that as the Russians and the Chinese are selecting inside this continent their hubs, their geopolitical forces, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, Nigeria. Nigeria is the only country who dissident now, who's not still in the ranks. But they know there's regional powers in the continent, and they will lead everyone. When you have good relations with Egypt, Egypt has, well, an influence on Libya, on Sudan. Algeria has influence on the southern countries, Nigeria also. So if you have the relationship with a country which is strong, and this is how the Eurasia plan is, they're implementing it through the G20. It means that there are points of hubs of geopolitical forces in the Middle East, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, and then you go through North Africa, there is Morocco, there is Algeria, then you go to the south, there is Nigeria, and then you will go till South Africa, and then the Horn of Africa, there is Ethiopia. So it's like that. And then in South America, Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, these countries are hubs.
Yes.
So they are implementing that.
Well, Egypt now is part of the BRICS, and within the African Union umbrella, it is part of the G20. Do we have a certain agenda for each economic institution, each economic assembly? Do we have certain targets we want to meet through BRICS, certain targets we want to meet through G20, and other targets related to other economic entities?
Well, the most effective now it would be BRICS, because these are frustrated countries, if we can call it like that. People who said we are fed up with the American and the American policeman of the world. We don't want to see that anymore. But in BRICS, it's not helping a country who needs help. No. If everyone is offering, contributing. If Egypt, for example, has an economic crisis, it has to open its markets, it has to open its investment geographical parts, like in the Suez Canal or in Daba or other places, for the countries inside the BRICS. They will work and they will give you the benefit, but at least they had places where they had their own businesses and money came to them. So it's a circle, it's like an engine. It's not a country who needs loans and then you give it the loans. And that's why they will have this bank. And that's why Egypt is hoping that the solution would be a united one currency of the BRICS, so we could have all the same level. But if you will have this, you will have to admit that you will have experts from these countries coming here and telling you what to do, because you won't have a currency and do whatever you want to do. No, every penny would be counted. Every economic strategy will be under the microscope. Let's go now to the G20. I think that these are just for, in the coming years, these will be conferences for just memories and photos of these leaders. I'll tell you the truth. We have watched the videos and the leaders shaking hands and all that. But what was real decisions? Nothing. It was nothing real that changed the world. The world didn't change after the G20. The world changed after the Johannesburg conference of BRICS. See the difference? In New Delhi, nothing changed. But in Johannesburg, everything changed.
Well, how soon then can we feel any sort of a difference after joining the BRICS, for instance, when we actually see real measures being taken and implemented within our country, along with all the other members?
You will see changes. It's not by time, it's by method. When, as I'm telling you, you will have experts who will come to the countries and tell you now, you are in our club, you've joined our club now, you're in our group. Now we will have a way of thinking. Now, if there is a French company coming to invest in Egypt and a Chinese company comes for the same investment, you will have to choose the Chinese. If you will say, well, I'm in the independent country, so I say, so what you're doing in our club? Can you do the same thing in the EU and go astray? No. Can you do the same thing in the Arab League even? When Egypt started talking to Israel, we were kicked out, and then we came back again. So there's united policies, and BRICS is about money. So I think that they are fighting the superpowers of Europe and the United States. So of course, if you have the ability to offer investment, they're waiting that you will let them, the Russians and the Chinese, to gain, not to let their enemies gain.
Yes.
Their enemies.
Well, now with all these economic moves that Egypt is making, whether independently or within the African Union, because economy and politics are always intertwined, do you think this will affect us politically in any way, give us more political power or more political influence, or can we make use of others' political influence?
Definitely. Definitely. Look, the US, listen to the US experts and the European experts. They said it's a severe blow that these countries are joining Russia and China after all the sanctions we have done, after all we have done now. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, of course, Iran and Ethiopia for them, and Argentina. It was always pro-West, and they have a pro-Western president. They're all joining this leadership of Russia and China, mainly. And it's a severe blow. So of course you will have a political and economic weight, because every time these countries will come to make business with you, they know now that they're not on the first grade, they're second grade now. And who's in the first grade? Their concurrent.
Well, going back to the G20, the whole of the African Union is now part of it, but Egypt is a major political and economic player within the 55 states, apart from South Africa, who's already in there. So what are we looking to gain, or what do we also have to offer?
For the G20, well...
Because there's a lot of talk about climate change and green energy and green economy, so what can we do?
What can we do? We can just show them that we are an economic hub, that we're not present now as a country who's seeking acknowledgement within the great countries. We are part of a regional or an international group, which is the BRICS. We have the same position as India, same position as South Africa. We are equal in our positions and in our way of thinking and our policies and economic policies. So we are not there to ask for loans and help. We are there to tell them, if you want to offer loans, we will be very happy, but if you don't, we have other sources. This is how business is.
And our diplomacy, how it's been actually playing it very, I mean, it was a very neutral position that we've taken, especially regarding the Russia-Ukraine issue, and it proved to be the position that all of the G20 now are taking. So were we right all along to take that stance, to have this sort of attitude?
Of course we all know, because we knew something that many in the United States are saying now, that the whole game, it was not for weakening only Russia. The Americans wanted to weaken the European Union, its industry, its economy, its euro, and they did it. They achieved on the huge scale what France is experiencing now in the African countries. It wouldn't have happened if the Ukraine war wasn't taking place. They're shattered. They don't know where to go. Now I just knew that the Austrian chancellor is proposing peace talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians. He's saying, enough, where are we going now? So I think that we knew from the beginning that this would lead to total failure at the end. And this confrontation with the Russians would not lead anyone to any point. It will only lead to one thing, that Europe won't be strong as it was before.
I mean, if we are talking about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, because it does affect the whole world economically and politically, do you think that we could be optimistic about it ending soon, or would it be much more realistic to wait after the American elections and hope that there is some sort of a different political approach by a new U.S. administration?
No, I don't think that it will end soon now. I think that, I'll tell you why, maybe it's a bit strange, but the Russians are enjoying what's going on now because they're gaining lands. Imagine that the war stopped at first weeks. Russia would not have the gas, would not have the grains. That now the whole world that's asking Russia, please give us the grains. The ports of the Black Sea, they wouldn't have all this presence inside Ukraine, under their control, people having their passports, the Russian passports. They are Russians, fully Russians. So the Russians are enjoying what's going on because they're gaining respect.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, definitely a lot of political developments taking place all around the world, and definitely the African Union joining the G20 is a step forward, the latest of a series of Egypt joining different political, economic entities and assemblies. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Cherif Amir, the geopolitical affairs expert and political analyst. Dr. Amir, always a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.